it says you're Matt Carney, but you're not.
No, that's my boss. We share this account.
No, I know Matt. He was roommates with one of my sons in college.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
So we can get started now. So
Okay.
I'm here with Ellen Stackable, and what is your official title with Poetic Justice?
I'm the executive director, and I'm also one of the founders.
How many people were on that original founding team?
Well, it's just two of us, actually. Claire Collins, who's a spoken word poet, was there kind of the first year and helped out, and then she moved. And pretty early on, we had a team of about five of us that were doing it in that first year. And since that was 2014, and now we have over 75 volunteers.
Wow, wow. And to give people a little background, the United States has the highest incarceration rate of any country worldwide, and then Oklahoma has the highest rate of incarceration for women. So for those who don't know, what led to this, the numbers in the US and specifically the numbers here in Oklahoma?
Wow. That is actually a really tough question. It's probably got so many layers. It goes back historically. I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary 13th.
Yes.
But I think a lot of it, particularly for men, is rooted in systemic racism. I think it has a lot to do with kind of the vogue of harsh on crime for a long time. It has to do with closing down of mental illness facilities to help people, socioeconomic. And in Oklahoma, I think we have a lot of laws that are not gender specific, but they're gender enforced. And some of them are rarely enforced with men and usually with women, like our failure to protect law. So I think all those things, when you add them up, there's a real well-known sociologist, Dr. Susan Sharp, who did a book called Mean Laws, Mean Lives, where she did kind of both qualitative and quantitative research on why so many women were incarcerated in Oklahoma. And actually her book was the reason I first wanted to go into prisons and help women. It just had a huge impact on me.
Yeah, and as far as you can tell from current research, are those trends still moving upwards when it comes to incarceration in Oklahoma? Have they stabilized some, or?
Well, it's gone down some with men. When we passed the two laws that made simple possession a misdemeanor,
Yeah.
that moved us to number 2 for incarceration of men. But as far as we can tell, we're still number 1 for women. And there's baby steps that are being made. We have a parole board, pardon and parole board now that's actually pardoning and paroling, something that didn't happen in our last administration. And I think that's making a big difference. We have groups like Still She Rises, which is a legal group that helps in North Tulsa, and we have Resonance works with women, women in recovery, Remerge in Oklahoma City. So there's things happening, but there's a lot more that needs to happen.
And so it's good to hear that you guys are not alone in these programs that want to help incarcerated people or others facing those issues.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background and how Poetic Justice came about.
Well, I am sort of a person that is hardwired for issues of social justice, and I've been that way, honestly, all my life. I mean, I remember in 9th grade, I went to a protest, and it's actually in California, and I asked if I could join the Black Panthers, which didn't really happen. So, I was in 9th grade, and I think the whole world opened up to me at that point, just seeing injustice on so many levels. I remember going to a march with farm workers who had no representation. So I've always been that way. And when I was working on my master's with OU through liberal studies, I had to have something to concentrate on. And I started researching and ended up looking at the problem of female incarceration in Oklahoma. And I had been an English teacher for about 20 years at a local high school. And one of my emphasis as a teacher has always been the power of writing to change lives. And so it just seemed like a natural fit. So I started looking for a way into the system, which was nearly impossible. And then I have a colleague, Dan Hahn, who is a hip hop artist. He goes by Algebra, and they started doing spoken word at the Tulsa jail with men. And so I tagged along one night and said, is anybody doing this with women? And that's when Claire and I kind of teamed up and started. I think that next week we went in to help women. And so it started off more with an emphasis on spoken word. And then as time went on, I think we realized they have so much trauma that they're trying to process, and they need a safe place to do that. And so more and more our focus is on therapeutic and restorative writing, rather than kind of a performative type writing.
For those who don't know, could you briefly explain what restorative writing is and what sort of impact that has on people in this situation?
So there's more and more research being done on trauma-informed therapies. And what we see, we started working with Dr. Chan Hellman at the University of Oklahoma's Hope Research Center, and kind of actually doing entrance and exit surveys about hope and positive affect and a sense of agency. And we also give them the ACE test when they come to our class, which is the Adverse Childhood Experience. It's 10 questions that really, if you even get higher than a 2 out of 10, it's a predictor for both psychological and physical problems later in life. So women in prison that we work with typically have about a 6 out of 10. And these are like catastrophic things, like I didn't know where my food was going to come next. I was abused at home. I had a parent who was incarcerated. So in order to process that trauma, they need an outlet and a safe place to do it. So a lot of what we do in Poetic Justice is setting the place to make it safe, and educators call that the hidden curriculum. So from the minute we walk into class, we have about 2 hours to when we leave. We don't script anything we do, but everything we do matters. Whether that's giving a hug to the women or introducing ourselves with our real names, which doesn't always happen if you go to prison. We sit in a circle. We ask them to make the rules to make it a safe place. And then we have about 30 to 40 different prompts that we use depending on the facility. Anything from writing a letter to your younger self, to writing a letter to your future self, to even writing poems, small poems of Thanksgiving called odes. How to be thankful in the moment for where you are. And, all those things begin to heal and restore. And when we first started doing it in prison, we had more of a stable group that we work with because they know what their sentences are. And so after our first 6-week class, we always ask, what can we do differently? And they said, we want more. So we started having 8-week classes. And then they said, no, we're just beginning to experience healing. Can we have an advanced class? So now we have essentially 2 8-week classes with women in prison, and they have, 16 weeks of therapeutic writing. And it's just been amazing to see the changes and the confidence. We ran into a woman at one of our events who had been in our classes, and I asked her, what effect did the classes have now that you're out? And she said, well, I really enjoyed them while I was there, but I don't think I understood how important your class was until I got out. And what I discovered is I have a voice, and I will never be quiet again. I will never let anyone take that away. And that's how we end every class every night, by repeating together, I have a voice, I have hope, I have the power to change.
So it's really something that gives these women a sense of agency.
Yes, everything we do, whether that's choosing the color of their notebook, to letting them make the rules of the class. Anytime we want to change something in the class, we don't just change it, we ask their opinion, what they want to do. And for women, I think it's important to realize that these are women that have never had a sense of agency. You know, from childhood on up, and certainly not in prison, they've always been kind of at the bottom of hierarchy. So, you know, we have this, our goal is to demolish hierarchy so that they can be free.
And what are some of the differences you notice being an educator, you know, educating in a classroom to people, whether they're privileged or not, they're free, or people who are incarcerated, or, you know, people who are maybe in a private group setting, you know, a poetry club or something like that? What are the main differences you notice going into those teaching environments that you have to apply?
Well, it's funny because, you know, I no longer teach at this high school. I just do Poetic Justice full time. But I noticed even in the last year, it was harder and harder for me to come back to the school where I taught, because honestly, working with the women in prison is like, they're like the dream class. You know, they're eager, they're ready to get down to business, they don't waste any time. You know, on the outside, you might have to kind of coax somebody, you know, or try to convince them that it's okay to be honest. But for a woman in prison, she honors and is so grateful for that time that sometimes I feel like they go straight for the jugular. You know, they just are willing to. Well, one of our students said once, she's been in prison for 20 years, and she said, if you're in county jail, your trauma is right on the surface, and it really needs a bandage to just stop bleeding. But if you're in prison, you've got scar tissue buildup. And the longer you've been in prison, the more scar tissue you have. So it takes an immense amount of courage to cut through all that, to come to find the place that needs healing. And so honestly, I'm always just humbled and amazed at their willingness to be honest, and share some of the deep, deep trauma they've been through.
And beyond the trauma, what about some of the artistry and the talent that these women have that they may have not been able to realize in themselves, you know? I'm curious about that.
I think going into it, first of all, we all have preconceptions about incarcerated people. You know, some of it's unconscious, some of it's conscious. A lot of it comes from the media. And I think one of the things I think many people think is that because they have had limited schooling, they'll really struggle with just any kind of literacy. And I have rarely seen that. I see the opposite. I see women who understand the power of words and use them in ways that are beyond anything that I can do as a writer. I mean, we have one of our students who's been with us for quite a while. She's now helping to facilitate classes there. Just finished a book that's about to be published. I just reread it last week, and I was just like, it just blew me away, because it's vignettes of her life, and they're not bound by chronology, they're bound by topic. So for me, I had almost this feeling of reading magical realism as I read it. And, you know, Janetta Calhoun-Mish, who's our poet laureate, has a printing press called Mongrel Empire Press, and she's going to print it. And so she'll have a book released. And this is a woman who, you know, I think Geneva finished high school, but I know she never went to college really. And yet she's brilliant.
Yeah. Do you think that it's important addressing appropriation in the arts and people telling the stories of incarcerated people who are on the outside, or you know, like you said, it's something we see in media all the time, whether that's television shows or movies. Do you think those forms of media are important for raising awareness, or that they're taking these people's stories and profiting off of it when these people should have the chance and the opportunity to tell their own stories?
You kind of, yeah, you know what I'm going to say, right? Well, and it's really interesting because there's a big debate right now in our country about just the appropriateness of all these police dramas, you know, that glorify, honestly, police breaking the rules and being brutal. And America's sort of addicted to them. And I think America's addicted to prison dramas, and particularly with women, because everybody wants to see, you know, the bad women.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we are super careful about what we do. I know several years ago, someone approached us and said they wanted to have the same kind of plastic mugs that women use in prison and put some of our poetry on it. And the more we thought about it, the more we thought, no, that's, are they pretending like they're incarcerated?
Yeah.
Because that's just appropriation. So we really do. I mean, every year we take the best of all the writing from all the different places where we are, and we put it together in an anthology. And it isn't so much to make money as it is that their voices can be heard.
Yeah, I have one right here behind me with my poetry selection, and I got that directly from an event where some of the women who had been through the program read their poems, and it was just a great experience, and the work is powerful, and I would highly recommend that everybody order those anthologies directly from you guys. So what about, let's first talk about how COVID-19 and the pandemic has affected the work you guys do directly. I imagine that operations have halted for a time and you guys aren't allowed to go into the
Right.
prisons and jails.
We are at day 120 now.
Okay.
So what happened was, I think we just realized that it was going to come. And so that first week in March, our volunteer coordinator, Hannah Aljabori, and I came up with this really official looking letter, and it was called Protocol for Distance Learning. And we sent it to all the wardens, the people over programming in every facility where we were. And it was basically, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to do distance learning. We'll send the writing prompts, with the meditation and everything to the women every week. And then we include a stamped addressed envelope so that they can send their poems back to us. And then we pair them up with different volunteers. So for instance, I have 2 women that I write to them the same assignment. And when I get their assignment, I type it up and send it back to them. And that was really successful. The wardens were incredibly grateful. We had one warden say, nobody has come to us with any ideas about how to do this. And the first 40 to 50 days, the women were in full lockdown, which means that they can't leave their cells other than 15 minutes for a shower and I think one other 15-minute break. So they had meals brought to them in their cell and everything. And then for the women at another facility, Eddie Warrior, which is south of Tulsa, they are in big open dorms that are really old and kind of in not good shape. And so they're on bunk beds. And they had to stay on their bunk bed 23 out of 24 hours. So it's brutal. Yeah. And so I think hearing from us on the outside, I think was just sort of a tether point for them. We've all noticed during this pandemic how we are losing track of time and what day is it. So that is always true if you're in prison, and it's exacerbated when you're on lockdown.
Right.
So we tried to we did an 8-week, we all thought this would end in 8 weeks. Well, it hasn't. So we did 8 weeks of writing prompts, all new ones, where it was really, they could do it on their own, and they were really kind of uplifting. We wanted kind of more positive ones. And then we started the next 8 weeks, and what we're noticing is that they need a way to process trauma still. And we can't be there. We can't provide that safe place. And so we've been trying to come up with creative ways to do that where they can still write. And what we've seen is we started off with about 40 women doing this, and now we have over 80. And every week I'll hear from someone and they'll say, hey, so-and-so wants you to start sending prompts. Could you do that? So it's been really successful. And we're seeing women that we don't normally see who might not be comfortable in our class. They're comfortable with writing and distance learning. And on the other hand, we're ready. If they open up the facility, they're not on full lockdown anymore. Now they get an hour outside a day, and they can eat in the cafeteria, but only in their specific dorm or pod. So I did a kind of a poll of all our volunteers and said, how many of you guys are willing to go back in if we got the okay? And all but 2 of our volunteers said they would. And wow. 2 had immune issues. And that blew me away. You know, because it is a scary time. And if you are in prison, you're hearing about all this on the outside. And as one person put it, it sounds like it's a zombie apocalypse out here, you know, and it's not. But their news feed, like for instance, at Eddie Warrior, on their TV, they get 2 stations and that's it. And it's CBS and Fox News and nothing else. So any news they get is from that, or they hear from family, some of them. So I think, you know, it's been a really critical part of what we do to be able to do that. Boy, I miss going in.
No, this is great. And I'm really happy to hear that you guys are able to continue these in one form or the other with the distance teaching. And
This was the mail today. I went to the mailbox and all these came today.
wow.
And after 8 weeks, what we did is we did an anthology. We always do an anthology of poetry after each class, and we give it to them and tell them, now you're published poets. So this is the one we did for the first 8 weeks at Mabel Bassett, and we sent them to every single woman. And what I didn't anticipate was many of them don't see each other because they're in different dorms. And so it was like hearing news from a distant country for them to be able to read poems. And they're like, oh yeah, Heather, I forgot. Oh, I wondered how you were doing.
That's
so
amazing.
It was very cool.
Yeah. And so on their end, to your knowledge, how has COVID-19 affected prison populations in this area specifically?
Well, Oklahoma has done, you know, we don't get to say that very often, but it's done an incredible job of keeping COVID out. I think there is under 20 cases the last I checked in the Department of Corrections, and they're just being super careful about it. I mean, it is at a huge cost emotionally, psychologically. And, you know, sometimes the women will, someone will say, oh yeah, but it's just that we're not being tested. But, you know, what I said to them is, if it was there, you would get sick. So many people would get sick because it's an immune compromised population.
Yeah.
You know, they have terrible diets. They're not exercising. So we've done a number of things too. We teamed up with, actually Hobby Lobby gave this huge donation of cloth so they could start making masks. So they all have masks now. And then we also started sponsoring meals for staff because I realized one of the wardens, I called her one day and she said, I understand that if COVID comes, it will be on my watch. And she said, I don't sleep at night because of that. So we sponsored meals for all the women, the staff at Mabel Bassett, Tulsa County, Creek County, and Eddie Warrior. Oh, and Cape Bernard too. You know, and worked with some other volunteer groups to do that too.
So when all of these things come together and you have those shows where you release anthologies or some of these women give readings, there was also a canceled show at AHA called Not a Number. So how has that affected the program? Because I imagine that donations are incredibly important. Selling anthologies is important to keep things rolling. And just to have that connection with the outside world and with the public that raises awareness and says, this is going on, you know, you need to pay attention to us. So
well, the art was really hard. Last summer, what we did was 2 volunteers with us are at Philbrook. And one of them is a former student of mine. And she said, we'd like to do art. And we got the okay to do it. So we had 2 classes running at Mabel Bassett last summer. One was physical art, and the other one was South American style autobiographical drama. And that was run by 2 professors from OU who are volunteers. And at the end, we had an art and drama show there. And then all the art was on display at AHA. And, you know, when I first got into it, you know, I am not a physical artist. And so it shows my preconceptions. I thought it was going to be sort of like summer camp. You know, like, oh, so cute, such a good job. But what they did was this artwork that was just phenomenal. And a lot of times out of materials that they had on hand. You know, one woman did an entire bust of herself. And she's been in prison for like 25 years, and she was determined to do this. And so we brought in different materials. Nothing was working because we were limited on what we could bring in. We could do stuff right there in the classroom, and then we had to haul it back to Tulsa every week. So finally, she figured out that she could use newsprint and tissue paper, and she used watered down Elmer's glue, and had a friend of hers put that over her with a straw in her mouth. And so it was like a paper mache.
Yeah.
And then she took it off after it dried. I can't imagine what that was like. It sounds horrible. And then she painted it with just these beautiful luminous colors, put poetry backwards on it, put poetry forwards on it. And it's just phenomenal. So the good part, I mean, we got canceled at AHA, which was unfortunate, but then there's a new place in Oklahoma City called the Diverge Hub that the Arnall Family Foundation has helped to fund. And it's basically a one-stop shop if somebody has been in the Oklahoma City jail and they need to get back, they're being released. So it has help mentally, it has help with housing. They assign you a justice navigator, because oftentimes people go back to prison only because they miss a date they didn't know they had. And so they contacted us and said, we want your artwork to be all through this. And so they ended up buying all the art, and it's on display there. And the artists who are incarcerated, we didn't know how to do that. And they said, we want you to have part of that, and then the rest you can give to an assigned family member. So one woman who's hoping to get out soon, has been in for 38 years. She is a talented painter. And so she had all the money she earned go to her sister so that when she gets out, she'll have a way to start life again.
Wow. That's wonderful. I didn't know much about the physical art side of things that you guys were starting up with this.
Well, and it's a different kind of healing that comes with that. And I think I started to see that we have a group that we work with in Tijuana, Mexico, and at a drug rehab there. And the women there have had no background of writing, of reading, of really self-reflection.
Yeah.
And so our volunteer that works with them realized the way in was through artwork. And then once they started doing artwork, she started to see they started writing. And so I think that has really kind of informed how I feel about, doing art. We were going to do a Summer of the Arts again this summer, but
yeah,
not yet.
And I ask this question really with no preconceived notions, out of genuine curiosity, but Poetic Justice has received lots of national attention, lots of press from the highest levels. But what has the reaction been like in the community, from these wardens, from the people who make the city officials who make the decisions that affect these people's lives, the wardens? You mentioned earlier a warden was very grateful for what you guys do, and I'm sure lots of them are. What are some of the things that need to change, and what's sort of the disconnect between a big news story and then what's happening on the ground?
Well, it's funny because somebody asked me, so do people ask you about being a CNN hero? And I said, no. I don't think people in Oklahoma even watch CNN. I think I've had like 2 times that anybody said anything to me.
Congratulations, by the way. I was aware of that.
I know. It kind of cracks me up. So at first, I think we encountered a lot of suspicion with people on the inside, wardens and deputy wardens. And the curious thing about Oklahoma is that all volunteer programs are under a chaplain at every Department of Corrections facility, whether it's faith-based or not. So we struggled a lot with chaplains because we are not a faith-based group, and they didn't understand what we were doing. And then we've run into things like we had someone tell us once, a chaplain, oh, girls should write. That's a good thing for girls to do. So, but over time, it's one thing to say no to the Tulsa World coming to Mabel Bassett. It's another thing to tell CNN no. So I think over time, you know, I kid around that it's kind of like the Willy Wonka gold card, you know, that the press has enabled us to have a presence where otherwise, you know, there'd be more suspicion.
Mm.
You know, I don't think, I mean, our advocacy is very relational and story based. You know, we don't go to the Capitol and lobby, but, you know, we do talk to everyone and we tell stories. And, you know, that's really, there's two ways I think you can see society change. And one is by lobbying and by changing the laws. And that's sort of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's model. You know, you change the laws and then you change the hearts of people. And then another model is what I call the William Wilberforce model. He's the guy that helped bring about the end of slavery in England. And he did it through storytelling and relations. And so he would have dinner parties at his house, take people for a little boat ride on the Thames, and they would go right by the slave ships. Hmm. And what he said was, now that you've seen it, you can never again say that you didn't see it. And so that's been our approach, you know, to tell the stories to anyone and everyone we can. We partnered with Scissortail Media in Oklahoma City about 4 years ago to do the documentary. And we just finished revising it and updating it with kind of a whole new storyline when COVID hit. So, you know, we really would love to see that released. We just don't know how to do it. So we're in the process of trying to figure that out.
And what are some of the things that you would like to see happen, whether it's big picture changes or areas that your organization would like to reach that it hasn't been able to impact yet?
Well, we feel pretty sure that we should just work with women. You know, we're more than willing to share a curriculum with other people, but I think one of the ways you sometimes lose your effectivity is when you try to do too much. And honestly, it's an overwhelming problem in America. You know, what do I want? I want to abolish prison as we know it. I want there to be therapeutic places for people to go. I think there's, you know, in all my years of doing this and over 2,000 women that we've seen, I've maybe seen less than 5 that I thought should never, ever get out. You know, they were psychopaths, sociopaths, but so many times what I see is women that are just like me, just like my friends. And I think, you know, why are they here? I don't understand. And they don't ever say, sometimes they're truly innocent. We see that quite a bit. But if they're not innocent, they don't say they are. But I look and I think if I had had the level of brokenness in my life that you've had, I would be here too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is, you know, and there's a huge urban rural divide in Oklahoma too. If you look at elections, it's just fascinating to me. Like when we did the medical marijuana, the entire perimeter of the state voted against it. And then there's these 2 hubs, OKC, Norman, and Tulsa-area that voted for it. And we see a lot of women with the harshest sentences are coming from small towns, small counties in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You know, and there's really no facilities for them, you know, or there's not a lot.
I'm coming to you right now from Hominy out in Osage County. You know, we have Dick Connor right up the road.
Yeah,
and then
right.
when you drive through the Panhandle, I can't remember that specific one, but just these jails and prisons way out in the middle of nowhere. And so how can people get involved with your organization, whether that, you know, under different circumstances is the full step of volunteering and going through training and helping teach or just giving? How can people get involved?
Well, there's always volunteering, but you're right, we're on hiatus with that right now, but we still have a need for more writing partners. You know, if you're willing to write letters, you know, and even be part of our next 8-week curriculum. We're going to be doing something we've never done before for the next 8 weeks, starting in August. And it's sort of what one of our volunteers called a deep soul work. And it's going to address issues of systemic oppression, racism, you know, self-worth, and So it's going to be, we've never done anything like this before. And what we'd like to do is have them paired up with somebody on the outside who commits to the same deep work as the woman on the inside, and they write to each other. So we always have a need for more people who want to write, snail mail. And of course, giving, you're right. Our big fundraiser that we were hoping to have at AHA didn't come about. And then we were going to have one in Oklahoma City in the fall, and I'm not sure that will come about either.
Okay, I hope that those listening are able to get involved, because Poetic Justice is such an important organization. And like you said, you know, it's not just hoping for things to change or waiting for something to happen down the line. It's something that, you know, I've seen with my own eyes actually impacts people's lives directly. My last question, I ask this to everybody who comes on at a distance, is what's something that you've missed most because of the pandemic, something you haven't been able to do, or, you know, it can be anything. So, a few people have said, I'd like to hug people again, or it could be, you know, a restaurant you like, or something like that.
Wow, there's so many things. I get to see my family, get to see my kids. So at least I have that. But I really do miss going to see the women in prison. You know, some of them have become really, really dear friends to me. And it's just rough not being able to do what I find so much life in doing.
Yeah. I just spoke with Maggie, who's actually involved with your organization.
Yeah,
It's a long time.
thank you.
Yeah. And she also said, just get back to work, that she misses being a teacher. She misses being in the schools and seeing her students. So that's an interesting overlap, that your answer is also just getting back to work and seeing those people.
And she was one of our first volunteers at Poetic Justice. So I've known her for a long time.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for talking with me. Anything else you'd like to add?
No. How will you connect us so that we can put this on our Facebook site and stuff?
Yes, this will go directly on our Facebook, and it might be a few weeks before that. I'll look at the schedule, but yeah, you guys can just share it directly from our spheres.
Thanks, Mason.
Thank you very much.
You asked really good questions. I mean, I've been interviewed a lot, and you asked some really tough ones that I appreciate. So
thank you. Well, I appreciate your honest and in-depth answers.
thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
You too. Stay safe.